All right, it is now my privilege to introduce our illustrious speaker this morning. And of all the titles Maureen holds, I think speaker is probably the most apropos because my girl loves to speak, and it's it's our blessing that we get to listen to her. So, without further ado, I hand it over to you, my sweet Maureen Muldoon.
Thanks, Will. I do love to talk. It's really nice to be able to find yourself in the vocation that you light you up. And I do love to talk. Not only do I love to talk, but I love to get people to talk. So I love that we are going to have a conversation on this topic. And I also love that we get to hear practitioners and people from across the globe sharing their voice and their kindness and their generosity. So I think we're a community of speakers. I think that's what we draw into the community, is that we do love to connect through conversation and speaking, and it's wonderful. So we're here on this beautiful Sunday morning where we're welcoming in the three kings, and these are the noble men who arrive at a very humble gathering, this celebration in the manger for a baby, and surrounded by like shepherds and donkeys and sheep, and under the starry night sky. And these kings they come carrying these gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But the real gift that they give us, if we're really willing to pay attention, because this moment where the kings come to visit the baby is so rich, that if we really anchored down into it, we could find so many gifts there. One of the real gifts is this invitation for all of us to walk the world like kings and queens, and to hold ourselves in that nobility, and the holding of that nobility for all things, not just to see ourselves as noble kings and queens, but to see all things as noble kings and queens. And some of us might think, how is that even practical? We might feel, some of us, that invitation has gone well unpracticed, to try on what it feels like to walk like a king or queen. And some of us might have never even tried to experience the consciousness of a queen who knows and expects that everything bows to her desire. And that even sounds a bit, for some of us, maybe like entitlement. And who are we to be so bold as to anticipate that kind of consciousness, or entertain that type of consciousness? And that's why this moment with the kings meeting the baby is so wondrous and ripe and rich. And we see that although he doesn't look like a king, that the baby is actually a king too. And it's interesting to note that in this moment, because we hear that phrase, the world reflects back at you. And these kings are seeing kings, and this baby is seeing kings, because it's a reflection of who they are. And so we kings and queens can see that reflection in the world as well. Even if we're not wearing crowns, we don't need a crown to designate who the kings are. In fact, if you do wear a crown, it might get you, being the subject of some interesting conversations. I had an acting teacher, Sylvia Lee, who just wore a tiara like almost every day, like it was a pair of reading glasses. And I thought it was like such a wonderful thing. But very few people can pull off the casual tiara. People might start thinking about us, talking about us, and saying like, what the heck has happened? Has Will lost his mind? He's walking around with a crown on, or a freaking tiara, and maybe it's his birthday. Well, actually it is his birthday. And so in those events, crowns make sense. But for the rest of us, those crowns are reserved for kings and queens and deities and birthday boys and beauty queens, special people on special occasions, people that we designate to the cool kid table, and the rest of us class clowns sort of look on with admiration. The crown represents this power, this legitimacy, this triumph, this honor, this glory. And it's interesting to consider, like, have we claimed our crowns? Have you claimed your power? Have you claimed your legitimacy? Have you claimed your triumphs, your honor, and your glory? Does that sound too bold? I mean, you are, after all, an extension of God. Unless in 191, which we just covered, it says, I am the holy son of God himself. I am the holy daughter of God himself. So basically, heir to all that's good and beautiful and holy about God, and that we are here to make manifest the glory of God. So what is that glory? What does that even mean? Glory means a great admiration towards something, or great praise. So do we believe that we are warranted great admiration and praise? And more importantly, do we believe in a God who admires us? Do we believe in a God that praises us? Just as the kings come to the baby and praise and admire him, and the baby praises and admires back, like, do we have that reciprocal relationship? We can expect that from our God if we have a holy relationship with God, because think about it, God can't be more admiring or adoring than you, and you have certainly adored and admired your children. Where did you get that from? That must be a God quality, to adore and admire your creations. So last week we celebrated the birth of Christ, the child, the king, the Prince of Peace, the King of Kings. And he arrives as a baby, which is kind of interesting, a baby king. It's even funny to say, baby king. I don't know why I think it's funny. But a baby king, and also that he's known as not just a king, but a king of kings. So if Christ is the King of Kings, ruling over all who rule, then who are the other kings that he's ruling over? If he's the King of Kings, who are the other kings? Well, that must be you and me. That are we stepping into that role? Are we playing out that part? We are heir to the royal love line of God. We are the kings and queens, and we get to rule. And I don't mean that in a 6th grade sign your yearbook kind of you rule type way, but I mean that as you literally rule your domain. There is your kingdom in which you rule. And are you a kind and gentle monarch, or are you a critical and condemning tyrant? Because this is your kingdom. And you are the kings and queens responsible for the kingdom. And you might think, how did I get to be a king? Well, just like Lady Gaga, you were just born that way. Because you know, kings are not voted into power. Kings and queens come through birthright, born into the noble, the regal, the peaceful, the prosperous, the joyful, the creative, and all the other God qualities that are yours. You're born into that. Nothing leaves its source. And so you too are kings and queens, and this and greater things shall you do. Nothing leaves its source, meaning if you plant a apple seed, you'll get an apple. If you plant a carrot seed, you'll get a carrot. If you plant a child of God, you get within it all that God is. You get the potential of greatness, because that's God. So imagine living in a kingdom amongst kings and queens who recognized their regal nature and were responsible for ruling their domain. If that were to be, we wouldn't need popes and priests and presidents. We would all be trusted to rule our own actions and deeds and play out our holy role with God. We would each be trusted to maintain our peace of the kingdom, our peace of mind, which is really the only thing we actually have domain over. But if we are to rule and rule wisely, you know, we'll need to begin to practice taking ownership of that which we have domain over. And maybe even surrender into allowing that vision of God, which is heaven on earth, to be a part of the possibility of that which you create. So for us to bring heaven to earth, we need to just simply learn how to bow our heads. This is the humility part of it. You know, can kings be humble? Well, the great ones are. The humble is humility is the gift that the baby brings in this scenario. this little humble baby who's born into a manger, who grows into this man who knows how to be humble. He never says, look at what I did, I'm so awesome, carve my name on every chapel and plaster my face on every wall. That's not who he was. In fact, he demonstrates humility by saying, it's not me, but the Father within me that does the work. He turns all of the praise and admiration back to the source. And this is actually what keeps that praise and admiration fluid. In A Course in Miracles, in the section of that talks about prayer, it says that true prayer is just an ever extending and flowing reciprocal nature of appreciation, where it's simply like where the Son and the Father are in reciprocal appreciation of each other. So it would sound like, thank you, Will. Thank you, God. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, God. Thank you, Colum. Thank you, God. Like, it's just this reciprocal nature between God and you, going back and forth and back and forth. So that's a way that we can begin to step into full ownership of the potential that lives within us. So this is how Jesus demonstrated it. And the only crown that he ever wore actually was one made of thorns. But he teaches us how to be humble and accept God's will, and thus, through that, brings heaven to earth. The kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So how does a baby teach us to accept a humble crown? Well, we learn a lot from the entrance of a baby. We learn a lot, like Jesus said, like, be like little children. We learn a lot when children enter the birth canal. The doctor says when the baby begins to enter, he's crowning. He's crowning. And the child knows exactly what to do to ensure a graceful and noble entrance. It's the very same thing that we do every morning when we get together on our calls, when we begin prayer. It's a pose that we take to assist our connection with the divine. And it's so simple that even a child can do it. We simply bow our heads. The baby bows his head. He tucks his chin and bows his head to move into the birth canal. And as we master the art of tucking our chin and bowing our heads, we arrive, as the baby does, to everything. So it's a ritualistic, symbolic way of saying, seek first God and all else is given. God is not in the world. God is within your heart, within yourself. So we need to tuck in, to tune in, to turn in, to receive that, dignified dialect from your divine. So we find ourselves in this position, being able to take on the mantle of that crown. Humility is a great characteristic of good kings. A humble man doesn't think less of himself. He just simply thinks of himself less. And what a wise and weighty burden it is to relieve yourself of all of the thinking of yourself. A Course in Miracles invites us into it in this way. It says to invite us to say, like, you could be right. I'd rather be happy than right. I don't know what anything is for. It's a very humble statement. I surrender my smallness to God's greatness. This is how I tuck my head. In the Course, it says, today we practice true humility, abandoning the false pretense by which the ego seeks to prove its arrogance. It says only the arrogant and only the ego can be arrogant, but truth is humble in acknowledging its might. Truth is humble in acknowledging its might, its changelessness, its eternal wholeness, all-encompassing, God's perfect gift to his beloved child. We lay aside the arrogance which says that we are sinners, guilty and afraid, ashamed of what we are, and we lift our hearts in true humility instead to him who has created us immaculate, like to himself in power and in love. Like, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? That we kind of like shed these little weights of arrogance and fear and separateness so that we can receive that divinity. And as we do, it takes us to a place of balance, that balance between nobility and humility. And then once we get to that balance between nobility and humility, we attempt to seek consistency, because consistency, after all, is king. And consistency is where your mind, your heart, and your gut are in alignment. They're all in absolute alignment. Your mind isn't thinking this guy's a jerk, and your mouth isn't saying, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. That's out of alignment. You're allowing yourself to be consistent. You come correct when you honor your truth in every cell of your body and every fiber of your being. And guess what? The world can handle your truth. If you have a beef with somebody, you don't want to talk about them behind their back, because nothing will be solved. You want to come right to them and say, hey, something's up. My mind is not in alignment with my heart around a situation. So let's talk this out. Let's figure this out. And as you begin to come correct to every situation, you begin to bring that correctness to every situation. So you don't play one face in one situation and another face in another situation. You carry that truth to every experience without allowing the experience to cause you to dim or dumb down your truth. Those kings didn't come dressed as shepherds to try and fit in. They came and they gave and they bring and they add, because that's what kings do. And this might be very uncomfortable for some of us to allow ourselves to be in that divinity and to extend. But no matter how uncomfortable it is to give, it's also a little bit uncomfortable to receive graciously. The mother and the child teach us how to receive in nobility as well. They don't go rushing around the manger trying to fix things and make things ready for fancy guests. No, they just greet the shepherd and the kings the exact same way. So this is the year that we stay consistent with who we are and consistent with where we are. This is the year that Jesus invites us, make everything different by making it the same. This is the year of giving and receiving equally. Give joy when you receive, give joy when you extend. Many of us are like, oh, stingy givers, and then also stingy receivers, like, oh, I don't deserve. So we're going to try and heal all of that so we can be in consistency with our humility and our nobility. And these two aspects also nod to our connection again to our divinity. Humility and divinity, nobility is your connection. It's your bone marrow. It's your fingerprint of your soul. And nobility will carry you. And when it comes from you, you carry nobility and it carries you. And it seeps into every encounter and every engagement. Conversely, if you were to carry the opposing energy of nobility, which would be like shame, that if you carry shame, it carries you into every engagement and every encounter. So if you carry nobility, you will rise into an expanded and optimal possibility of your divinity and honor the divine. If you carry shame, you will shrink and silence yourself in the swill of your own inadequacies, which is not true. And as Marianne Williamson says, you are a child of God, and you're playing it small doesn't serve anyone. And this moment of the kings and the baby teaches us that. And teaches us how to be in balance with all of that. There will be times this year when you'll want to experience your nobility. There'll be times this year that you'll want to experience your humility. And both of those are perfect aspects of a holy child of God. When we honor, and when we're here to honor that high idea of our nobility, it causes us to kind of lift ourselves a little bit and reach to the heavens and not fear the mystery of the unknown, and to look towards the horizons as kings are known to do, and to entertain, desires, and to let your imagination draw into you new, innovative ways of being, and to make peace with that high vision of the king. And also, to honor the vantage point of that innocent child who is anchored so close to the earth, and that babies do that for us. They bring us into this present moment, away from the horizon and into the present moment. Babies demand that we be present with them, and they invite us to entertain the moment at hand and the simple empires that we experience when we get really still. So these are two other aspects of our divinity and our humility. And again, they seem opposing, but they work so well together. And as we begin this year in this dark cocoon of winter nights, when the stillness is really thick and very welcoming, there are these times when we get to welcome in these dichotomies of the noble and the humble, and the magic and the mundane, and the light and the dark. And we get to make space in our inner cave to entertain even the less loved aspects of ourselves. And you might find that your nobility is the less loved aspect of yourself, or your humility is the less loved aspect of yourself. But now, here in the dark hours of the early year, we get to take it all in, and we get to just listen to it all. This is the time of year of great listening. This is the time of year that's been held in many cultures and philosophies and theologies as very holy, when wise men leave gifts at the foot of newborn babies, and blessed mothers nod in gratitude, and the sweet sound of night mixes with nature into this holy symphony, and angels and ancestors come to visit and patiently wait for an empty ear to fill with musings and merriment. And this is the time to receive your messages that are waiting for just you. So be still and listen as we take in this new year, and we take in this new baby, and we take in these opportunities to remember our sacred connection to it all. For noble, humble kings and queens are we, in constant states of giving and receiving love. And that's the word.
Wow, Maureen. Beautifully done, as always. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about that in our conversation, which is coming up in a bit. But first, let me pass it to Mari, who will lead us in our community offering. Mari, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, looking forward to this conversation. But as a reminder, if you're new, just so you know, we are a non-for-profit virtual spiritual community, and we do exist on the generosity of our community members. We thank everyone for playing your part and for taking the opportunity to make a donation for today's daily bread. Your generous donations help us to bring spiritual leaders, artists such as Clive, and speakers to Sunday service, and keep all these important conversations going. If you were spiritually fed today by the conversation, we invite you to just go within, sit with your divine, and see what is yours to share. No gift is too small. The donation link, you will find it on the chat, as well as on our website, SpeakEasy, spiritualcommunity.com. You will see a donation button there and see what is yours to give. So I now invite you to be part of the conversation, which is our special sauce. So I send it back to you.
Thank you, Mari. Thank you for that. And okay, now it is time for the unique aspect, I would say, of SpeakEasy Sunday service, which is our conversation. And this is where we invite you to speak easily, to find your voice and your truth, and share your thoughts, inspirations, awareness, and your any questions you might have for the community. So if you feel called to share a question or a comment, please just raise your hand, your virtual hand. It's in the bottom. In the reactions tab, you can raise your hand, and you will be recognized and called on. Please also, if you're able to leave your video on, it's great to be able to see you and get to know you as we go through the conversation. So with that, why don't I send it back to Maureen to facilitate the conversation?
Thanks, Will. Thanks for helping out today. So yeah, did anybody have any thoughts or things that they wanted to add about humility and nobility and how you practice it? Yes, Colin.
It's not quite on point really, Maureen, with that, but so today is Sunday and it is the evening here, and I was walking around the village of Killaloo where I live, beautiful village, and I was walking past the Catholic church, and I've been I was born Catholic, you know, born in 1963 in Dublin in Ireland. Like, what chance did I have? it was going to happen. And I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. But anyway, I called into the local Catholic church and I lit a candle for a friend of mine. And but I'll tell you what struck me, if I may, and it's, you know, you're talking about the baby Jesus there and the crib and the three wise men, and I looked at the crib, and of course baby Jesus is there, and Mary is there, all serene and beautiful, and Joseph is there, and the wise men and so on. And it struck me, and this is just by way of spark of conversation, I suppose. It struck me that it's a very sanitized depiction. Should I leave now, Maureen? Should I leave now?
No, I love it. Yeah, go ahead, tell us more.
It's like, seriously, it's a very sanitized image that we have of a, you know, there was no pain, there was no blood, there was no mess, it wasn't cold, right? You know, we're talking about an unmarried teenage girl giving birth. So in very turbulent times. And I suppose I'm drawing a parallel between what was happening back then and what's happening in the world today. I mean, we're talking seriously turbulent times everywhere we turn. So I don't know what the point is, except when you made the introduction and told us what you were going to speak about today, or perhaps when Will introduced what today was about, I made notes about that visit to the crib, and I said, okay, I feel the need to put it out there. So that's all.
I think it's a great point, Colin. I think it's a beautiful and great point, because here's the thing. When we romance an idea, we don't want to taint it with anything that's humbling. We want to tell like it from the king's version of the story. There was no blood, there was no pain, only angels and, you know, stars at night, and it was all romantically perfect. When we tell the story of the crucifixion, we also don't want to add any noble nature to it. You know, we tell these very pointed stories like the news does, you know, to get us to respond or act in a certain way. But in that manger, as you pointed out, was everything. And in that crucifixion was everything. And in my resurrection is everything. And in my crucifixion is everything. And can I tell a more faceted and holy and truthful story? That my marriage is magnificent and my marriage is horrible. You know, this is an example. It's not necessarily true, Will, but we've done a lot of work. That a relationship can be terrible and that a relationship can be amazing. And I love that. I love that you bring that up, because I think it's a less fantasized version of the story. I appreciate that. And I appreciate it for many reasons, because when I first gave birth, and I'm going to go there, and all of a sudden the placenta came out, I was like, am I dying? I had no idea. And I had read a lot of books. I had read too many books to be afraid of my own placenta. But yeah, it sure was creepy. As I went on and gave birth and gave birth and gave birth, I got to see, like, that was such a beautiful, that bloody show, that blood, that is so, it's a beautiful aspect for us not to sanitize the birth or the death. I love that. Thank you for adding that to our conversation. Hey, Will. Mary wants to join too.
Well, good on you, Colin, for getting us started. As always, it takes someone to say something, then it sparks a thought in me. So in what you said about the sanitization of you know, the birth of Christ, I mean, don't we experience that in all throughout our lives? I mean, it must be some sort of personal, you know, human nature. I mean, I just finished pounding on at least a version of a Christmas letter, and my Christmas letters are generally, you know, I try to say, you know, summarize some of the important aspects of my family's life from the previous year. But I read other people's Christmas letters, and it's, you know, a nonstop litany of prizes and awards and highlights and vacations and blessings and presents. And it's like, I read these things and I want to jump off a bridge, because like my life isn't like that. You know, my life is full of, I don't know, reality, apparently a horrible marriage or something. But which I was unaware of, but we'll work on that after service. But I think maybe the trick is, what you were talking about, Maureen, in the service, the nobility and the humility, but and life is all of that, right? To me, it doesn't feel genuine. I don't even think it serves me really to just cherry pick the highlights of my life and pretend that that's my story. Life is more nuanced than that, and it's got highs and lows, and there is, there are noble aspects, but there are definitely, inevitably, things that come to pass that humble me.
I think that's the risk that we as society face at this moment in time, at this juncture in history. It's the social media, it's the Instagram, it's the TikTok generation. And all anybody presents is how wonderful this moment is. And many times, I think it's probably fair to say, those moments have been manufactured to within an inch of their lives, right? to present the very best version. And it's just not real. And so I think we've a challenge coming down the road with our kids and grandkids, that they think life is supposed to be all shiny and bright. And they're not capable of handling the tough times when they come, which they inevitably will and have done for any of us who are here of any vintage at all, and they will again. So anyway, look, thanks for indulging me. I just thought I'd throw it in and see where it leads. So I'll bow out.
Thanks, Thank Colin. How about for you, Mary?
Yeah, when Colin was speaking, it took me right back to when you and I were in Ballyvochen, and we were looking at the statue of Mary outside the church, and I just had a bit of an antsy moment because, I just thought, this picture of Mary as this demure, meek, mild, white, wrinkleless, probably fairly middle class looking lady, and what I thought we ought to be venerating were two different things. And it really struck me then. And I think it's probably a little bit of what Colin was saying as well, but it's something that's been on my mind ever since, actually. It's kind of this, as though she would never say boo to a goose. And obviously that's where personally I'm not coming from, as you know, and neither are you, Maureen Muldoon.
No. So, and again, we are sold these one-dimensional versions of deities and villains. There's like a meekness and an earnestness and a sweetness in our villains. They were somebody's baby. There's a tyrant inside every, angel here on earth, at least, and that we make peace with all of that. I think it's much better that we do that. And there are, to Colin's point, there are some places in social media where people allow themselves to be completely transparent, as we were saying, like consistent in your truth, even if that consistency is not popular, even if that truth is not popular, to be consistent in your truth. And I think that's why we also right now have some really great comedians, because there's a lot to pull back, and look at from a vantage point of full-on truth. So thanks, Mary. How about for you, Joni?
Mine is more of a question. What I love about having social media and photographs and everything, there's a little teeny bit of a distance. You can plan it, you can upload it, edit it, but practicing both the queendom and humility in our inner circle of intimate relationships. I just wondered if you could help, because I know you've talked about energy, the kind of energy and mindset that I bring in that moment, especially when a loved one triggers or a situation is unwanted. Can you just help with either some ideas, or is it self-talk, or is it, is it the work we do in the morning in the journaling and then we bring that? I think
it just comes down to striving for the best within yourself to offer to the world, and expecting I don't want to say the least, but to expect your fellow travelers to to know that you don't know where they're coming from. Their best, to strive to deliver your best, and to know that they're actually delivering their best in this moment at that time. And so, you know, in that way, you know, we won't get caught up in our insane expectations. You know, that you're actually doing your best right now as you are, as Megan Lasserman likes to say, connection, not correction. You know, Mary didn't say to the shepherds, like, you know, wipe your feet before you come in here, or to the kings, you know, she just like seemed to nod. And again, it's a parable, it's a story, but it is a possibility for us to entertain demons and angels with equal grace within ourselves and with each other, because this too shall pass. We're only here for a short time, and might as well attempt to be at peace with it. Hi, Sinead.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for your talk. It was so great. And kind of Joni kind of half asked the same question that I was thinking of. But in, you know, when you were talking, you spoke about, you know, if somebody is irritating you or triggers you, that you go and you say that rather than, you know, kind of holding that grievance, and you stay humble in that, because it's not about you wanting to be right and that, but you stay in your power. And I suppose I was just wondering if maybe you could talk a little or just expand on that, about what happens, how do we honor our own humbleness, that's a word, and nobility, if the other person doesn't want to listen and they don't want to sort something out or find a resolution?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first, go to God. Like, first take all of your, you know, ruffled feathers to God and say, what is this? And then your divine will tell you, go speak to them directly. Or, let's review it this way, or let's reframe it this way. So you can navigate a great deal of healing and readjustments through just, I don't want to say just going to God, but through going to God, right? And then number two, then go. Don't go to them first. Always go to God first. Always seek first God, then get the action. And you might, you know, if you do that and you go to them and they're not ready for that conversation, then go back to God. I did my part, you know, in just the same way that we say, like, I invited them to service, but they didn't show up. So what? I did my part. And it might take me 1,000 times to play my part before the other person picks up the harmony and starts to sing back. But I'm really bad at harmony, so I have compassion for people who are like, do you understand you're in this conversation with me? I'm talking to you. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
That's such a great point and a really great explanation. Thank you so much, because that's the piece sometimes I think for all of us, and I know I'm including myself in that, is that you forget to go back to God. You know, you do it and then you go, well, that didn't work. So, you know, the ego mind wants to take over, and then we're not humble or true to ourselves, because it's like, well, I'm not going to believe that. But you're so right. It's the bit about going back to God and saying, what's the next best step?
Yes, exactly. And, you know, it's what you will be guided to do at 1 hour may be completely different the next hour. So it's like 1 hour, my divine might say to me, like, take care of your son, bring him in, get him some tea. And the other hour might be like, drop his ass off at a rehab because you're done taking care of him. Now you have expired. Now you're making yourself his God. You know, so it's interesting to think that God is in constant communication with us and continues to bring forth the optimal idea that is ever changing. And you're exactly right. The ego does want to say, you already went to God, and it didn't work. It worked up until the point that it was supposed to work. So yeah. That's what I'd say about that. Do you want to share anything else, Sinead?
Just going to say, it's such a great point, Maureen, and really has helped me with something, because in that moment, then we also can see the other person as the villain, as opposed to seeing that it just wasn't the right timing.
Yeah, timing is everything. oh my gosh, give yourself the benefit of going with God's time. And as an impatient person, that's a really hard thing to do. As soon as I get an itch, I'm like, scratch it, fix it, change it. Instead of like, let me just be in the discomfort of this itch and wait for the appropriate timing for this person to actually be able to receive the words I'm saying. I mean, it's an art form, it's a practice. So good luck. You got this. Hi, Clive.
Hi there. Just going back a bit to what Colin was saying about the messiness of real life, as it were. You know, that everything. It just made me think of. I remember when I was being told that I would quite likely not survive the illness I had, and I was in a situation where I was sort of spiraling down a bit and thinking, what's going to happen? You know, am I going to survive? What's happening? You know, with my children and all this sort of thing. But I can remember as the further I went into that sort of darkness of that place, a bit like, you know, with the birth of Christ, you know, that dark night, being led towards a light, being led towards something you knew that was important. You know, like those kings were being led, and I didn't really know why. And I felt in that way that it was very difficult and confusing in that time. But the outcome was the best time of my life. I look back on it now and think that thing, because it was the birth of the rest of my life. It took me to a place where I found myself and realized that I had to become that sort of Christ in me. And it was a messy time. You know, it was dark, it was difficult. It was like, you know, I had to go through an awful lot. But it just kind of reminded me that it wasn't something like, oh yeah, this is, you know, you walk along merrily in the sunshine and you kind of, okay, yeah, I'm going to get sorted. It was going right down to the bottom to come out again and to understand. And it just occurred to me when Colin was saying that about that realness. No, but I still look back on that as just one of the best times of my life, that pain and that anguish. And within that learning, that total learning of who I was and what this was all about.
I agree with you. I had that experience when my first husband left me for Miss Universe, and I had this like just bottom drop out year of like nothing. I had no money. I had a 4-year-old on my hip. I had a wholly broken heart. It was like a total fracture of everything that I thought I knew. I'd lost my church. I'd lost everything because of this experience, and it was magnificent. It was definitely the best year of my life. I mean, I was down to like, my depression made me not be able to eat, so I was down to fight and weight, and I was like booking everything, and I was recognizing that like I had to make my own decisions and figure out how to not be codependent. And man, it was a rough and wonderful year. I guess it was the best of times and worst of times. Will, you went through cancer. You went through one of those hot and holy years. Did you want to share anything?
Well, there's no way for me to say not really. So yes.
Wow. It's a really
No,
good point.
I would say for me, almost without exception, the biggest blessings in my life, the biggest opportunities to grow and learn about myself, were not any of them initially welcome. They all feel like persecutions when they land, because it requires change, and it requires, you know, rethinking, and it requires, you know, well, it's so, for example, you know, no one ever wants to hear the words "you have cancer," but I would say it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It opened my eyes. I think it still every day makes me a more compassionate, empathetic person. It has helped me help others innumerable times, just by virtue of the fact that I've been through it and have had that experience and survived and thrived, and I can hold myself out as an example to others. Not anything I would have ever picked, but like I say, I think it's you know, one of the highlights of my life. And you know, your experience, all of it. I mean, none of us, you know, hope for disappointment and struggle, but those end up, I think, almost without exceptions, being blessings that, but the blessing isn't always evident at first.
Yeah. I think it's such a great can of worms that Colin opened. I'd love to even have him come back and do a whole sermon on it. I'm sure he has a lot to say about the reality. So think about it, Colin, because I think it's a great conversation of the faceted way of reality and how we get to be in the faceted way of reality, and that it's not the Pinterest, that it's not the picket fence, that it's so much more than that. Anyhow, well, that's our conversation for today. We do get to have another song from Colin. Did anybody else want to share anything before we move from the conversation?
I'm not singing.
Oh, no, Colin, you're not singing. Sorry, Clive.
Go on, Colin, you do one. Okay, I was actually gonna, I chose a different song. I chose this song I'm gonna do originally, because I thought when I read the blurb that this would be appropriate, and then I tried singing it, I thought, no way, that's not gonna happen. And then the conversation's gone on today, and I've kind of thought, do you know, this is the right song to do. So we've been talking about faith and trusting in things, so I'm just gonna have faith and trust that this is going to work. This is a song which I actually said to Maureen the other day, which is inspired by Maureen actually, because she did a talk on staying golden, and this was a song that I wrote in response to that, and is the kind of closing song in a musical I wrote. It's called, Stay Golden, so we'll see how it goes. I'm just putting it out there to God, get me through it. What you sow, what you plant, oh, it will grow. Denying your life brings only sadness. Step out into gladness and stay golden. Yes, stay young and wild. Oh, stay golden, child. Stay free. Oh, it's so easy to forget just how bright you are when those around you won't let you shine. There's no rules to win in the race. You don't need to dim your inner grace. You just shine. Stay golden. Yes, stay young and wild. Yes, stay golden, child. Stay free, stay free. This day and night you are the one, and your broken boots just carry on. And like those kings, stay Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clive. What a great song. I felt like that would be a cool song that the Kings were singing to the baby within all of us to stay golden. So I appreciate. And you can find Clive's music. I think the links are up there. Where's your music at again, Clive? Let us know.
It's on my website, which is www.thelightIreland.com. Or it's on Bandcamp under Clive Williams on Bandcamp. You'll see that song will be there. As lots of my other stuff.
Stay golden. Awesome.
Very much.
Inspired by the book, The Outsiders, written by a young girl, 15, wrote the book, The Outsiders, which was inspired by a poem, I think by Robert Frost. So Robert Frost inspired the author, I forget her name right now. Who? Will? You're muted.
S.E. Hinton.
And then she wrote the book, and then I did the sermon, and then Clive sang the song.
Hallelujah.
That's awesome. Well, everybody have a wonderful week. Stay golden, stay in your kingdom, stay in your innocence, and stay in your balance, and stay consistent with all you are. God bless. Bye.